fantasy, sweet fantasy, fantasy, sweet, sweet fantasy, fantasy, sweet fantasy, fantasy, sweet, sweet fantasy. When I first laid eyes on you,